To begin this journey, one must first confront the quiet, persistent hum of the modern soul, a vibration that speaks of a profound dissatisfaction with the spiritual tools we have been handed. For decades, the world has been told to sit, to breathe, to empty the mind, and to find solace in the stillness of meditation. We have been conditioned to believe that the path to enlightenment is a ladder we must climb, one silent breath at a time, until we reach a state of transcendental nothingness. But what if this very practice, as it is commonly understood and commodified, is not the doorway to freedom, but a sophisticated velvet curtain designed to keep us comfortably asleep within the dream? The title, Stop Meditating and Start Remembering, is not a call to abandon the pursuit of truth, but an urgent invitation to cease the endless preparation for a life that is already happening. It suggests that the Great Awakening, as it is often portrayed in contemporary circles, has become a trap, a recursive loop of spiritual seeking that keeps the seeker perpetually in the role of the student, forever waiting for a graduation that never comes because the graduation was supposed to happen before the first lesson began. We find ourselves at a cosmic crossroads where the architecture of reality is beginning to thin, revealing the gears of a grand machinery that thrives on our diverted attention. When we meditate in the traditional sense, we often strive to become a blank slate, a vessel of emptiness. While there is a quiet beauty in the void, there is also a danger in becoming so enamored with the silence that we forget the music we were sent here to play. The trap of the Great Awakening lies in the seductive idea that we are here to escape the physical realm, to ascend beyond the messy, vibrant, and often painful realities of the human experience. We are told that the world is an illusion, a maya, and that our only duty is to detach. Yet, this detachment often serves as a form of spiritual anesthesia, numbing us to the visceral call of our own history and the ancient encoded wisdom that resides not in the absence of thought, but in the depths of our cellular memory. To remember is a far more radical act than to meditate. To meditate is to look for something new. To remember is to reclaim what was never truly lost. Imagine, if you will, an amnesiac king sitting in his own garden, practicing the art of sitting still so that he might one day feel like a king. He breathes in the scent of the jasmine, he focuses on the rhythm of his heart, and he waits for a sign of his sovereignty. He spends years in this quietude, achieving great peace, yet he remains a gardener in his own mind because he has forgotten the crown resting on the table inside. The Great Awakening trap is the endless meditation in the garden while the palace remains empty. We have been lulled into a state of peaceful waiting, a spiritual holding pattern where we believe that by clearing our minds, we are doing the work of evolution. In reality, we may simply be clearing the workspace of the very tools we need to reconstruct our true identities. The call to start remembering is a call to look at the jasmine and recognize that you planted it eons ago, to feel the heartbeat and know it is the drum of a long-forgotten conquest, and to realize that the peace you seek is not a destination, but the atmosphere of your original home. This exploration invites us to consider that we are not biological accidents trying to become spiritual, but vast, ancient intelligences that have intentionally entered a state of profound forgetting. We have donned the masks of the persona, the ego, and the social self with such conviction that we have come to believe the mask is the face. The contemporary spiritual movement often encourages us to polish the mask, to make it more zen, more aligned, or more high vibe. But this is merely a refinement of the prison. The Great Awakening trap manifests when we turn spirituality into another hobby, another identity to be curated, or another metric of success. We seek 5D consciousness, as if it were a luxury vacation destination, forgetting that the dimensions are not places to go, but ways of perceiving where we already are. To remember is to pierce the veil of the seeker identity and acknowledge the finder who has been standing in the center of the room all along. The cosmic dimension of this shift involves a recognition that time itself is not a linear progression, but a vast, simultaneous landscape. When we stop the repetitive cycle of traditional meditation, the kind that seeks to escape the now for a better now, we begin to fall into the verticality of the present moment. Here, memory is not a recollection of the past, but a resonance with the eternal. We start to remember our origins not as a sequence of events, but as a quality of being. We begin to see that the structures of power and control in our world rely heavily on our collective amnesia. A population that remembers its divine sovereignty cannot be easily managed. A population that is perpetually trying to awaken through quietist practices can be kept in a state of passive compliance for centuries. The trap is the carrot of future enlightenment that prevents us from eating the feast of current existence. As we peel back these hidden layers of reality, we see that the metaphors of our lives, the recurring dreams, the unexplainable yearnings, the sharp pangs of déjà vu, are not glitches in the system, but signals from the deeper self trying to break through the static of the meditation trap. We have been taught to observe our thoughts like clouds passing in the sky, to let them go without judgment. But what if some of those thoughts are not clouds? What if they are telegrams? What if they are coordinates? By letting everything go, we may be discarding the very breadcrumbs left for us to find our way back to our true nature. The shift from meditating to remembering is the shift from being a spectator of one's mind to being the architect of one's reality. It is a transition from the passive to the active, from the student to the master, and from the dreamer to the one who knows they are dreaming and chooses to wake up within the dream. The weight of this realization is both terrifying and exhilarating. It suggests that we are responsible for the restoration of our own majesty. It implies that no guru, no app, and no specific breathing technique can do for us what the simple act of courageous recollection can achieve. We are standing on the precipice of a new era, one where the Great Awakening is no longer a buzzword for a New Age subculture, but a literal reclamation of the human blueprint. This introduction serves as the first ripple in a pond that aims to disturb the stagnant waters of modern spiritual complacency. It is an invitation to stop looking for the light at the end of the tunnel, and to remember that you are the light that makes the tunnel visible in the first place. We are moving beyond the era of the searching soul and into the epoch of the recollected spirit, where the trap of the awakening is recognized for what it is: a final, subtle hurdle placed by a fading paradigm to keep the lions of humanity dreaming of being lambs. In the chapters of thought that follow, we will dismantle the components of this trap. We will look at how the illusion of progress keeps us stagnant, and how the symbolic language of the universe is constantly whispering the secrets of our identity. We will explore the mechanics of this cosmic amnesia and the specific triggers that can spark the fire of remembrance. This is not a guide on how to achieve a state of being, but a map to help you recognize the state you have always occupied. The journey is not outward into the stars, nor is it purely inward into the void. It is a collapse of those distinctions into a singular, radiant point of recognition. You are not a guest in this universe. You are the host who has forgotten the guest list, the menu, and the reason for the party. It is time to stop the quiet contemplation of the doorstep and finally walk through the door. To navigate the labyrinth of the Great Awakening trap, we must first identify the pillars that uphold its invisible walls. The most pervasive of these pillars is the illusion of linear progress, the belief that spiritual evolution is a vertical ascent toward a distant peak. In the modern spiritual marketplace, we are sold the idea that we are working on ourselves, as if the soul were a piece of rough marble, requiring endless sanding by the tools of meditation, shadow work, and frequency attunement. This concept creates a perpetual horizon. The closer you think you are getting to the light, the further the horizon recedes, because the very act of seeking implies that you do not currently possess that which you seek. The core theme of the Great Remembering is the total collapse of this horizontal timeline. It asserts that there is no becoming, only being. When we stop meditating with the intent to improve or transcend, we shatter the mirror of the ego that reflects a fragmented, unfinished version of ourselves. We begin to see that the seeker and the sought are the same eyes looking at each other through a thin veil of self-imposed delay. Another fundamental concept within this exploration is the distinction between the quietest void and the active resonance. Traditional meditation often emphasizes the void, the cessation of thought, and the achievement of a blank state. While this can be a useful reprieve for a stressed nervous system, it becomes a trap when the void is mistaken for the destination. The Great Awakening trap utilizes the void as a kind of spiritual holding cell where the individual's creative and transformative power is neutralized in the name of peace. True remembrance, however, is not a blank space. It is a crowded, vibrant, and resonant field of data. It is the recognition that the chatter of the mind is often just the untranslated frequency of our own multidimensionality. Rather than trying to silence the mind, the practice of remembering involves tuning the mind to the specific harmonics of our original blueprint. We transition from being a silent witness to being an active participant in the symphony of creation, understanding that our thoughts are not distractions, but the raw material of reality weaving. This brings us to the concept of the cosmic amnesia system, a structural element of our current density that functions as a sophisticated data encryption layer. We must understand that our forgetfulness is not a failure of the soul, but a design feature of the game we have entered. However, the trap occurs when we begin to worship the encryption rather than seeking the key. Much of modern spirituality has become a celebration of the amnesia itself. We focus on the beauty of the struggle, the necessity of the lesson, and the honor of the path. While these perspectives offer comfort, they can also act as justifications for remaining in a state of limited awareness. The Great Remembering posits that the lessons are over and the path has already been walked. The theme here is the return to the source code, where we stop trying to learn new spiritual laws and instead start remembering the ones we wrote before the world began. It is a shift from the posture of a student to the authority of the author. Interwoven with this is the theme of sovereignty versus submission. Many meditative practices, perhaps inadvertently, encourage a form of spiritual passivity, surrendering to the universe, letting go of control, and trusting the plan. In the context of the Great Awakening trap, this surrender can be a form of abdication. If we are indeed fractals of the Prime Creator, then surrendering to an external universe is essentially surrendering to a shadow of ourselves. The Great Remembering emphasizes that you are the architect of the plan. When you stop submitting to the flow and start being the flow, the nature of your reality changes instantly. The trap is the belief that there is a higher power waiting for you to be ready or enlightened enough to receive your inheritance. The truth is that the inheritance is currently being held in escrow by your own belief in your unworthiness. To remember is to walk into the bank of the cosmos and realize you are the owner of the institution, not a petitioner for a loan. We must also address the concept of the mirror world, the realization that our external reality is a high-fidelity feedback loop designed to show us the contents of our subconscious. The awakening trap often leads people to try and fix the mirror, to manifest a better life, to clear the external environment, or to wait for a global shift to change their personal circumstances. Remembering, conversely, focuses entirely on the projector. It acknowledges that the external matrix is a neutral canvas that only gains color and form when we project our internal memory onto it. If we are remembering a state of lack, the mirror reflects poverty. If we are remembering our divine essence, the mirror reflects abundance. The shift here is from reactive meditation, fixing what is wrong in the reflection, to proactive remembering, reclaiming the original image. This requires a radical honesty, as it means every shadow we encounter in the world is a pixel of our own forgotten power, waiting to be integrated rather than meditated away. Furthermore, we explore the theme of frequency entrainment as a substitute for gnosis. In many spiritual circles, there is an obsession with raising one's vibration through external means, certain music, crystals, diets, or specific meditative visualizations. While these can be supportive, they often become another layer of the trap, creating a dependency on external tools to maintain a state of alignment. The Great Remembering suggests that your fundamental frequency is already perfect and unchangeable. You do not need to raise your vibration. You need to stop suppressing it with the belief that it is low. This is a subtle but profound distinction. One leads to a life of constant maintenance and anxiety about dropping one's vibe, while the other leads to an unshakable poise. When you remember who you are, you don't need a crystal to hold your frequency. Your very presence becomes the frequency that organizes the world around you. Finally, the theme of the collective dream versus individual awakening highlights the tension between the Great Awakening as a mass movement and the solitary nature of remembering. The trap often manifests as a desire for a collective event, a solar flash, or a mass ascension that will do the work for us. This collective longing is often a distraction from the individual's responsibility to wake up now. To remember is to realize that you are the one you have been waiting for, and that the collective shift is simply the sum total of individuals who have ceased their waiting. We are moving from a theme of waiting for the event to being the event. This realization dissolves the anxiety of the when and replaces it with the certainty of the am. It turns the cosmic narrative from a spectator sport into a first-person experience, where the hidden architecture of the universe is revealed not as a prison, but as a playground that has been waiting for its master to finally remember the rules of the game. Through these themes, we see that the shift from meditating to remembering is a transition from a state of seeking to a state of being. It is the dismantling of the spiritual bureaucracy that we have built between ourselves and our own divinity. Each of these concepts serves as a chisel, chipping away at the ornate stone of the awakening trap until only the raw, radiant truth of our existence remains. We are not here to find the truth. We are here to stop hiding from the fact that we are the truth. The layers of reality are not hidden by some dark force, but by our own insistence on playing the role of the seeker. Once that role is abandoned, the scenery of the trap begins to dissolve, and the vast, familiar landscape of our true home begins to emerge from the mist of our long, meditative sleep. To truly grasp the gravity of the Great Awakening trap, we must move beyond the intellect and enter the realm of the mythic. For the soul speaks in the language of symbols and archetypes. Consider the story of the celestial clockmaker who, in an act of supreme creative boredom, decided to become one of his own gears. He disassembled his vast consciousness into billions of tiny, ticking components, each one localized in time and space, each one convinced it was a solitary, struggling cog, responsible only for its own rhythmic movement. To ensure the game was authentic, the clockmaker placed a veil of heavy iron over the gears. He then whispered a rumor into the darkness. If you move perfectly enough, if you vibrate with enough stillness, the veil will lift. For eons, the gears practiced their stillness. They developed elaborate schools of friction reduction, believing that by becoming the most efficient, silent cogs possible, they would earn the right to see the sun. This is the symbolic heart of the Great Awakening trap. The gears became so obsessed with the purity of their ticking that they forgot they were the ones who built the clock. The trap was not the veil. The trap was the belief that the veil was a reward system for good behavior. One day, a single gear stopped trying to be still and instead tried to feel the vibrations of the gears around it. In doing so, it felt the underlying pulse of the entire mechanism. It didn't find peace, it found a memory. It remembered the heat of the forge and the intent of the design. The moment it remembered it was the clockmaker, the veil didn't lift. It simply ceased to matter. The gear remained a gear, but it now ticked with the authority of the whole. We can also look to the allegory of the labyrinth of mirrors, a place where a traveler wanders in search of the original face. In this labyrinth, every wall is a polished surface reflecting the traveler back to themselves, but with subtle distortions. Some mirrors show the traveler as a saint, bathed in golden light. Others show a shadow, twisted and dark. The traveler, convinced that enlightenment lies in finding the most accurate reflection, spends lifetimes meditating in front of the mirrors. They try to hold the saint reflection for as long as possible, believing that if they can just stabilize that high-vibe image, they will have awakened. However, the Great Awakening trap in this narrative is the mirror itself. The mirrors are designed to keep the traveler's gaze fixed outward, away from the source of the reflection. The traveler becomes a connoisseur of their own image, a student of their own distortions. To start remembering in the labyrinth of mirrors is not to find a better reflection, but to realize that the light hitting the mirror is coming from behind your own eyes. It is the moment the traveler closes their eyes to the reflections and feels the warmth of the internal sun. The memory is not of what you look like, but of what you are, the invisible radiance that makes the mirrors possible. When the traveler remembers the source, the labyrinth becomes a playground rather than a prison, and the obsession with polishing the soul vanishes in the light of the realized self. There is another narrative, perhaps more ancient, regarding the star that forgot its fire. Imagine a vast, sentient star that, seeking to understand the nature of shadow, projected a portion of its essence into a deep, cold canyon on a distant planet. This projection took the form of a small, flickering candle. The candle, surrounded by towering walls of stone and the howling wind of the material world, felt small and vulnerable. It began to practice a form of light meditation, focusing its tiny flame, trying to grow bright enough to illuminate the entire canyon. It joined other candles in a collective effort to bring the dawn, believing that if enough candles flickered in unison, the darkness would be defeated. This is the symbolic representation of the modern spiritual movement, the collective effort to light up the world from a state of perceived smallness. The trap is the belief that the candle is a separate entity that must work to become the sun. The great remembering occurs when the candle realizes that its flame is not a product of the wax and the wick, but a localized tether to the great star above. It stops trying to grow its light and starts remembering the solar furnace from which it was birthed. In that act of remembrance, the canyon doesn't disappear, but the fear of the dark does. The candle realizes it doesn't need to illuminate the canyon to be safe. It is the light that defines what the canyon is. The struggle to awaken the world is replaced by the effortless radiance of a being that knows it can never be extinguished. Consider, finally, the tale of the weaver of the infinite tapestry. The weaver decided to enter her own creation, becoming a single thread within a complex, unfolding pattern. As a thread, she felt tension, pull, and the pressure of the surrounding fibers. She began to meditate on the flow of the tapestry, trying to align herself with what she perceived as the divine will of the fabric. She spent ages trying to be the most aligned thread, believing that there was a master weaver somewhere outside the frame who would eventually pull her into a higher pattern of gold and silk. The great awakening trap for the thread was the concept of the master weaver as something external. The thread became a devotee of the pattern, a servant of the weave. But the great remembering was the shocking realization that the tension she felt was her own hand pulling the loom. She wasn't a thread being woven, she was the weaver experiencing the sensation of being woven. To remember was to regain the perspective of the loom while still vibrating as the thread. This dual consciousness is the goal of the pathless path. It is the end of the spiritual search and the beginning of the artistic expression. We are not here to be saved by the tapestry. We are here to remember that we are the ones holding the needle. These symbols, the gear, the traveler, the candle, and the thread, all point toward the same architectural flaw in our current spiritual understanding. We have turned the tools of liberation into the furniture of ourselves. We have made awakening a noun, a destination, a thing to be acquired, when it is actually a verb, a memory, an action to be reclaimed. The trap is always the same. It is the subtle displacement of your own power onto a future state, an external force, or a ritualized practice. By engaging with these narratives, we bypass the ego's defenses and speak directly to the ancient intelligence within. We remind ourselves that the Great Awakening is not a collective event we are waiting for, but a personal history we have temporarily misplaced. The landscape of our lives is littered with the artifacts of our true identity. We only need to stop the repetitive movements of the meditator long enough to recognize the master who left them there. As we move from these stories into the practicalities of existence, we carry with us the weight of these symbols. They act as anchors in the shifting sands of the material world. We begin to see the clocks and labyrinths of our daily lives, not as obstacles, but as the very scenery we designed for our own rediscovery. The shift from seeking to remembering is the most profound transition a consciousness can undergo, for it marks the end of the journey of the prodigal son and the beginning of the reign of the returned king. We are no longer looking for the light. We are looking with the light. To transition from the ethereal heights of cosmic storytelling into the grit and texture of daily life is the ultimate test of the great remembering. If these insights remain confined to the hours of quiet contemplation, they are merely another form of the trap, a mental sanctuary that offers no change to the structural reality of the individual. Practical integration begins the moment we stop viewing our spiritual life and our mundane life as two separate oceans. The Great Awakening trap thrives on the compartmentalization of the sacred. It suggests that you are most yourself when your eyes are closed, and most lost when you are paying your bills or navigating a difficult conversation. Remembering, however, demands a total synthesis. It is the practice of holding the frequency of the clockmaker or the weaver while standing in line at the grocery store. This requires a radical shift in how we process the mundane details of our existence, seeing them not as distractions from our path, but as the specific pixels of the reality we are currently projecting. In the real world, this looks like the cessation of the seeker's anxiety. Many who are caught in the awakening trap live in a state of perpetual preparation, always buying the next book, attending the next retreat, or waiting for the next planetary alignment to finally feel empowered. Practical integration means identifying this loop and choosing to act from a state of arrivedness. When a challenge arises at work or in a relationship, the meditator might retreat to find peace, but the rememberer leans into the moment, recognizing that the situation is a reflection of a forgotten aspect of their own sovereignty. Instead of seeking to transcend the conflict, you integrate it by asking what part of your original power is being called back through this specific friction. This turns every interpersonal interaction into a recovery mission for the soul, where the goal is not to stay calm, but to stay present as the architect of the encounter. Furthermore, this shift has profound implications for how we handle our physical bodies and health. The Great Awakening trap often leads to an accidental disdain for the flesh, viewing the body as a low-vibration vessel that needs to be purified or transcended. This can result in an obsessive focus on restrictive diets or ascetic practices that actually further the sense of separation. Integration through remembering involves recognizing the body as the most sophisticated piece of technology in the known universe, a biocrystalline antenna that is currently downloading the memory of the stars into the density of the earth. When you stop meditating out of your body and start remembering into your cells, the body responds with a different kind of vitality. Health becomes less about fixing a broken machine and more about removing the mental interference that prevents the body's original blueprint from expressing itself. You eat, move, and breathe not to become spiritual, but as an expression of the spirit you have already remembered yourself to be. The implications extend deeply into the realm of vocation and creative output. In the trap of the awakening, many people find themselves paralyzed, waiting for a divine calling or a sign from the universe before they commit to a path. They spend years in a holding pattern, meditating for clarity while their talents atrophy. The Great Remembering posits that your calling is not something you find, it is something you are. Every impulse to create, to organize, to heal, or to build is a memory of a function you have performed across eons. Practical integration means honoring these impulses as commands from the higher self rather than suggestions to be weighed. It is the move from being a consumer of spiritual content to being a producer of reality. In this state, your work becomes a ritual of remembrance, and your career is transformed into the physical manifestation of your internal geometry. You stop asking what the world needs and start remembering what you came here to give, understanding that the world's needs are perfectly met by your authentic expression. On a social level, this shift dismantles the hierarchy of the enlightened versus the unawakened. The trap often fosters a subtle spiritual ego, where the seeker feels they are ahead of the masses who are still asleep. This creates a new form of separation, a spiritualized version of the very systems of control the seeker is trying to escape. To remember is to realize that everyone you encounter is also a clockmaker in a state of profound, self-imposed amnesia. This realization breeds a deep, grounded empathy that is far more effective than the performative compassion often found in meditative circles. You no longer look down on the sleeping, but rather you treat them with the respect due to a king who has forgotten his name. This changes the way you communicate, the way you lead, and the way you participate in your community. You become a stabilizing node in the collective field, influencing others not through preaching or proselytizing, but through the sheer undeniable weight of your own self-recognition. Economically and systemically, the Great Remembering calls for a transition from a scarcity-based spiritual model to an abundance-based sovereign model. The trap keeps us focused on what we lack: more time, more money, more peace, and promises that spiritual practice will eventually provide these things. Remembering flips the script, asserting that abundance is the natural state of a consciousness that is no longer in denial of its own identity. In the real world, this manifests as a courageous trust in one's own creative capacity. It means making decisions based on the memory of your infinite nature, rather than the fear of your finite circumstances. This doesn't necessarily mean ignoring financial reality, but it does mean refusing to be defined by it. It leads to the creation of new systems, new businesses, and new ways of exchanging value that are not rooted in the survival frequencies of the old world. Ultimately, the practical integration of these concepts leads to a life of effortless authority. You stop trying to manifest things and start allowing them to materialize as a natural byproduct of your state of being. You stop asking for permission from the universe, from mentors, or from the collective they, and you start acting as the primary authority in your own life. This is the end of the spiritual childhood, where we look for parents in the form of gods or gurus, and the beginning of a cosmic adulthood. It is the realization that the Great Awakening is not a tidal wave coming from the horizon to sweep us away. It is a fountain rising from within us to wash away the illusions we have clung to for so long. Every mundane act, from washing the dishes to signing a contract, becomes an opportunity to affirm, I remember who I am, and I am here on purpose. We stand at the final shoreline of this exploration, gazing back at the intricate structures of the Great Awakening trap that once seemed like the only path to the stars. The journey from the passivity of meditation to the active fire of remembrance is not merely a change in philosophy. It is a fundamental shift in the orientation of the human spirit. We have seen how the seductive peace of the void can become a spiritual waiting room, how the illusion of linear progress keeps the horizon of enlightenment forever out of reach, and how our own magnificent amnesia was designed as a game that we were always intended to win. The narratives of the clockmaker, the weaver, and the star remind us that we are not the subjects of a cosmic experiment, but the architects of a reality that has been patiently waiting for us to reclaim our seats at the loom. To conclude this journey is not to reach an ending, but to acknowledge the beginning of a life lived in the light of the true self, where the searching finally yields to the finding. The transformational call of this message is a radical invitation to cease the endless preparation for a divinity that is already your birthright. You are being asked to put down the manuals of the seeker and pick up the scepter of the sovereign. The trap of the Great Awakening is dissolved the moment you realize that there is no one coming to save you, because there is no part of you that is truly lost. The ascent we have been promised is actually a descent, a deep cellular grounding into the present moment where the memory of your eternal nature resides. It is time to stop looking for signs in the heavens and start being the sign that the heavens are looking for. The world does not need more people who are trying to reach 5D. It needs people who are fully, vibrantly, and powerfully human, embodying the totality of their multidimensional wisdom in the here and now. This is the ultimate rebellion against a system that thrives on your self-doubt. To remember your own unshakable worth without needing a ritual to prove it. Imagine the freedom that comes when the weight of spiritual work is lifted from your shoulders. When you stop meditating to achieve a state, you begin to live as the state. Your life becomes an unbroken flow of creative expression, an effortless dance between the memory of the infinite and the experience of the finite. The trap was only ever held together by your belief that you were incomplete. Once that belief is incinerated in the fire of remembrance, the bars of the cage are revealed to be made of nothing but your own diverted attention. You are the dreamer who has finally noticed the texture of the pillow and the sound of your own breathing. You are waking up, not from the world, but into it, bringing the full light of your original home into every conversation, every creative act, and every quiet moment of existence. The boundary between the sacred and the profane vanishes, leaving only the radiant reality of your presence. As you step away from this exploration and back into the vivid theater of your daily life, carry this remembrance as a silent, golden thread through everything you do. When the world tries to convince you of your smallness, when the systems of control offer you a new form of awakening to buy, or when the mind wanders back to the old habits of seeking, simply breathe and remember. Remember that you were there at the forging of the sun. Remember that you have worn 1,000 faces and walked 1,000 paths just to arrive at this singular point of recognition. The Great Awakening is not a future event on a cosmic calendar. It is the heartbeat you are feeling right now. It is the sudden, sharp clarity that the person reading these words is the very same intelligence that wrote the laws of the universe. The game of forgetting is over, and the era of the recollected human has begun. This is your transformational call, to walk through the rest of your days with the poise of one who knows the ending of the story. Do not wait for a solar flash or a collective shift to grant you permission to be great. Be the event you are waiting for. Turn your gaze from the mirrors of the labyrinth and look directly at the source of the light. The architecture of the trap is crumbling, not because of a grand battle, but because the occupants have simply remembered how to open the doors. You are free. You have always been free. And the universe is holding its breath to see what you will create now that you are finally awake within the dream. Step forth not as a student of the light, but as the light itself, and let your life be the masterpiece that 1,000,000,000,000 years of forgetting was designed to produce. The memory is yours. The throne is vacant. The weaver is ready. Welcome back to yourself.